My name is Donovan Taylor Hall, and welcome back to another episode of the Never Alone series. And today we are joined by our wonderful guest, Dr. Pamela Morris-Perez. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to speak to you. Okay.
All right. So, going back to the experience that you thought of, what were you afraid of before you spoke up for the first time?
I'm going to speak about, as you know, I'll give you 1 minute of background on me and then launch into this. Uh, I lost my daughter, Frankie, to suicide. She was 17 years old, and that was 6 years ago now. So a couple years ago, so this was 4 years after she died, Um, I needed to write to a friend who had disappeared for those 4 years. They say with loss, and especially suicide loss, your address book changes in an instant. And I hadn't really heard from her much, and I can describe what I did hear from her over those 4 years. And I was going to see her at a conference,
Mm,
and so I I had been actually talking about it in therapy for weeks because what I knew would happen when I saw her at this conference was she would see me, from across the room, she would shriek, "Pam!" and run over to me and give me a huge hug and just launch into a back and forth about life and work and that. Um, and I couldn't do that anymore with her
mm,
because she had been gone for 4 years. Um, and it's not like she didn't reach out, right? There was an email she had sent to me about a paper she was doing. There was a job opportunity she sent me a note about. She texted once that she was in New York and said, "Oh, I'm here for a meeting. Do you want to get together? I have space. I have less than an hour between, the meeting and dinner." And it just wasn't enough time to really
mm,
be the new person that I was, which was somebody who talked really openly about grief and loss and how I
mm,
was integrating it into my life. We had been very, very close friends before that. She was somebody I met back in my 20s. Um, she, we had planned our weddings together, actually.
mm,
So we met in our early 20s. We planned our weddings a few years later. About a decade later, we both went through in vitro fertilization together. And then we worked together too. So we would do research projects together. And um, I remember this one time we were sitting in a playground and our kids were maybe, I don't know, my guys must have been, Frankie is a twin. So I had, my guys were maybe 10 years old and her kid was maybe 8. And they were way too big to be at this playground, but they were playing around on those little, tricycle bikes, like running
yeah.
around. And we got so excited about this idea we had. We were trying to think about how do you connect interventions for kids when they're like really, really little infants and toddlers with preschool interventions with school. And we drew this picture out. She like grabbed this notebook from her bag and started drawing this picture. I actually still have a screenshot of it on my computer, on my desktop, about how do we think about how to sort of layer interventions for kids across space and time. Um, and uh, and then I remember the sort of last time I felt like she was my best friend. She had come obviously to the funeral, my daughter's funeral, and we had a reception at our home afterwards. And I remember walking her to the door and saying goodbye to her. And she, said, take care of you and gave me this big hug. And, I could practically feel her like earrings on my
Mm.
cheek as I hugged her goodbye. And then I really didn't hear from her for 4 years. Um, and so I was going to see her at this conference and I knew that like she would hug me and I didn't know what to do. And I can keep going, but I didn't know whether I should pause at this point.
No, I
Yeah.
just appreciate you sharing that with us. I think one of the hardest things about asking for help from people in your life is that sometimes, especially in situations where it's very obvious that we need support, it feels even harder to have
Yeah.
to call someone in that should be there. And so it's like it's almost easier to talk to a stranger than to
Mm,
have to say to a close friend, like, where are you? Or I need you, or you've been gone. And this person
right.
went through multiple milestones with you in your life.
Right.
And I do grief work with kids. And one
Mm,
thing about grief camp is that everyone has experienced it. Grief is one of the most common, like, human experiences. But until you go through it, it's like
right.
you're not in the club. So people will
Right.
just kind of like hands up,
Right.
I can't do anything. And so I'm not going to talk to you
Right.
because I don't know what to do. But if it's a close friend, that's so tough. I mean, and then losing a
Yeah.
child, I mean, that's the time where you need the most support. So I just really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I think through the next couple of questions, we can kind of go deeper into the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. That sounds
I
right.
appreciate you. I want to say this is a theme that I've noticed through this is my fourth one I've done or third one is
Mhm.
the idea of turning pain into purpose. And I
Right.
just really am honored to be working with you and other people who have gone through really tough things and have
Thank you.
used that to then support and help other people.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Ooh, you and we could talk for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, we could. We could. We could. No,
So thinking back to that moment, what
Mhm.
was the tipping point? Was it the knowing that you were going to see her, or was there something
Yeah.
different for you?
No, it was knowing I was going to see her, but it was sort of the last second, right? So the conference
Mm,
was that week. It was Saturday morning. I woke up early. Like I said, I had been speaking about it in therapy for weeks. And I woke up early because I was like, what am I going to do? And I sat there on my couch with my, laptop on my lap and was trying to figure out what to write in this email to
yeah,
her so that I
yeah.
wouldn't be in this space where she would hug me and I'd either have to push her away or just pretend I was fine with it.
Mm, mm,
And I had made a commitment. You were just talking about sort of purpose. And obviously I do, as work in suicide prevention now, but honestly, I think one of the ways that we make our way through loss is actually we honor the people we lose the most.
mm,
And Frankie was this sort of deeply authentic person. She was open and loving and warm and sort of always herself with
mm,
everybody, and yet made everybody feel like she knew them. And I
mm,
had made a commitment to sort of her and to myself that after she died, I would be more authentic in my relationships. I wouldn't be fake with anybody. And so I couldn't just be okay with her hugging me and pretend it was okay.
yeah.
And so, so I sat there on the couch and it was early spring and so, the birds are just starting to chirp outside. I live in New York City, but you can still hear them outside.
Yeah.
And the sun was just coming up and, I'm lying there, like the cursor's like blaring at me like, "Come on, you can do this. You can write something here." And I'd practiced about, my therapist had sort of helped round and round with it. And I ended up starting to write, and I wrote how hurt I was really honest. I
Mm,
told her I was really hurt. I told her that I was a really different person now, that I couldn't just do things quickly and be, all work wise, that I needed to spend time in vulnerable spaces,
mm,
that, honest, open conversations were really, really important to me now. Um, I told her how much I missed her friendship,
mm,
and that the last 4 years had been impossible ones for me. And that, and I did leave the door open. I said, I said the line about the address book that, your address book changes in an instant. I said, I'd welcome you back in it if you want to be in a vulnerable space, but I don't know that you can do that with me.
mm.
Um, and I wrote this long email to her. Um, and then I clicked send, which was really
Yeah.
scary,
Yeah.
when you're like,
Writing is tough, but
okay,
that send moment
you
is
know,
really tough.
yeah. And I sent
Yeah.
it, and then of course had to wait, right, all day long,
Mm,
where, how did it land with her? Would she feel like I was attacking her?
Mhm.
Would she, I didn't want to make her feel bad either, because I don't know that I would have been good at grief either if it hadn't happened to me. And so, if the tables were turned, reversed and she had lost her kid, I don't know that I would have been as, great with her either.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I waited the day and I think I like, baked bread that day or did something and it came out horribly because, like I probably over kneaded the challah or something. It was bad and hard and all the things, but it gave me something to do with my hands.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and just waited and then woke up the next morning and there was an email waiting for me that she had written very early the next morning, the Sunday morning. Um, and it was a beautiful email. Like she said that she was, I remember the words she said something like, I'm just abjectly sorry. It was such a good
Mm,
word. Like,
hmm.
she's just like, I'm ashamed. I am sorry. She said, I don't know why I haven't reached out. She said, but maybe it's because I didn't know want to say the wrong thing. She said maybe it was just
Yeah,
I was like taken over by my silly life. It was a really she she owned it in a really like in all the ways you want someone to own it. And then she said she deeply missed being my friend.
mm,
And we have this funny thing about my name. So when she met me, I was Pam. And then when I graduated from graduate school, I became Pamela. And
mm,
so she wrote at the end of the email, she said, you know, Pam, she goes, and I'm so sorry. I feel like it's hard for me to not call you that all of the time
yeah,
still.
yeah.
And she said, I'm sorry, I still have to keep calling you that. She said, seeing you at the conference was one of the few things I was looking forward to doing. And so it was this beautiful back. And she's like, I don't know how to fix this. And I don't want to put it. She actually had another line that I loved. It was something like, I don't want you to have to like do all the work of figuring out how to do this too. Um, So it was really a sort of this beautiful give back to me and a surprise to me because I really had written her off. I had really and
Yeah,
if I didn't have to see her at this conference, I probably would have just let our friendship go and assumed she's just not one of those people that can do grief because
yeah,
some people can, some can't. Um,
yeah,
but I think sometimes we just don't call people on it so much, maybe is the
yeah,
issue, you know? And
yeah.
because it's scary for both of us.
Mhm.
Um, so and then what was neat is I don't know if I should just keep going or whatever, but
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, just to give us some space, I think in the series so far, I've heard a lot of people, their experience is really about asking for help.
Yeah.
And in a way, it seems like that's what you were doing, but it's also about speaking up for the
Yeah.
first time. And I think speaking up for yourself is very
Mhm.
hard,
Yeah.
especially when there's a lot at stake, because not only is this friendship important to you, you're already in a vulnerable place, and you knew that here's this opportunity, I made this commitment to myself and
Right.
I have to speak up about it. And I really, I'm grateful that you shared this experience and this perspective with us because it isn't just about speaking up and saying I need help. It's about
Right.
speaking up and saying this is who I am, or these are my
Yeah.
boundaries, or like this is what I need in the moment. And that experience can be really hard. And again, like we said earlier, it can be even harder when it's with people in your life that you're close with,
Yeah.
because it's kind of like we hope that they'll do that
They'll just do it
or
automatically.
they'll
Yeah.
see it, but we have
Hmm.
to say it and then put ourselves out there. I was holding my
Right.
breath a little bit,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
waiting to hear how she responded.
Yeah.
Uh, Thinking about the experience, it seems like there was this moment where you're going to have to face it, right? You're going to see
Yeah.
her. You're going to
Hmm.
have to make a
Yeah.
decision. I can't put
Yeah.
this off anymore, right? This
Yeah.
is, I have to make
Yeah.
a choice to speak up in this moment.
Yeah.
Would you do anything differently this time around? Would you talk to her or yeah, would you do anything differently?
So I think that if I had been a tiny bit braver, I might
Mm,
have actually just said, "Hey, I'd like to speak to you at the conference," and done it in person.
mm, mm,
It turned out that I did bump into her then when I got to the conference. I mean, sending an email is brave, but not
mm.
quite as courageous as doing it in front of you, right?
Yeah,
There's the click send and then I can hide and
yeah,
and
yeah,
on the one hand, what's beautiful about an email is I was able to craft it exactly what I wanted to say, and things didn't just blah,
yeah,
blah, 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 fall out of your
yeah,
mouth.
yeah.
And she too was able to like. I'm glad she took the day to respond because I suspect she wrote it over the course of 24 hours.
Yeah.
Um, and that is a good thing for an emotionally charged moment.
Mm,
But
mm,
our friendship could have survived doing this in person.
yeah.
And I wish I had trust our friendship enough to have just said, "Hey, like this is you weren't here and this is what I need."
Mm,
In fact, like we did see like so we bumped in, of course, there was a major, early childhood talk at the conference.
mm,
Outside the doors of it, we bump into each other. I see her and she sort of approaches me really hesitantly and she's like, "Can I hug you?"
mm,
And I was like, "Yeah," nodded. And then like we're having this little moment and like, you realize we're outside the doors of this like major pre-K event. And so like, and we know a ton of people in the field, right? Because this is sort of what we've both been doing for a long time and what all the work I did before I got into suicide prevention. And so like random people would be like, "Hi, hi, hug." And we'd be like, "We're trying to
Just
do this
having this
very
moment.
personal moment here. Please leave us alone for a minute." Like we need the little like, like
Yeah, yeah.
and then we, walked into the room together, and I remember I said to her, I wasn't sure that you'd write back. I wasn't sure that we'd get here. And she said, "Well, we had to do this because like we were at each other's weddings. Like
Mm,
we
mm,
had to be okay." And it was just such a really authentic moment between us. Um, that meant that was a real turning point in our relationship.
yeah.
Um, and then we ended up at another conference together and shared a room again, back to the old days, which we're actually doing again this week. We're back to the
Oh,
first one.
yeah.
And she had lost a cousin to an accident, a much, much younger cousin, like, someone in their 30s had died by getting hit by a car. It was this random thing where they
Mm,
were walking on the sidewalk and they got hit by a car. And she said, "I want to leave the conference for a few hours to go put flowers on the spot where I think my cousin might have died." And I said, "I'd like to come with you and do this with
mm,
you." And we did. And it was this very sweet moment of, we, stopped by Whole Foods, whatever, bought flowers
yeah,
and found the spot that we think the cousin died and had this really lovely time together. I mean, lovely,
yeah.
uh, you know, grief-centered time together
Mhm.
that was really, really beautiful, actually. And I was really glad to be there for that, for her, um, and spend that moment with her
Yeah.
after.
I'm just happy that there's a happy ending and
Yeah.
speaking up, it sounds like it brought you all closer or built your relationship in a new way to kind of
Yeah.
move forward. And so I really am grateful that you shared that with us. I'm saying grateful and appreciate a lot because
Yeah.
I truly am.
Yeah.
Just thinking about other people who might be afraid to speak up for themselves, especially with people in their lives. If you could
Yeah.
give them a piece of advice, what would that advice be?
I think it's take the chance. I mean, take the chance on the relationship. I think that we assume that some people can't sit in hard spaces because we don't tell them what we need.
Mhm.
And I do think about grief and loss, and frankly, most hard things. We think some people just aren't capable of sort of getting all the
Mhm.
way there. And it's true, maybe some people aren't, but I think it's better to know because I think more and more people saying it really clearly. I think a lot more people are capable of doing it than we give them credit for. And yeah, so it's don't presume, I guess, is my sort of piece of advice on this.
I agree. I think when we can create spaces or opportunities for people to show up, we'd be
Yeah.
surprised at
Yeah.
who shows up in those
Yeah.
moments. So I really appreciate. I feel
Yeah.
like a broken record. I
No.
don't know another way to say it, but this is just such a good conversation
Yeah.
to have around speaking up because there's lots of things that we need to speak up. There's lots of ways that we quiet our voices
Yeah.
from fear or rejection or shame and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, I just want to go back just so we have it.
Please.
Thinking about the moment before, what emotions came up for you? And then how did that change after you had
Mhm.
not just hit the send button, because I'm sure
Yeah.
some of those emotions
No, no,
stayed,
no.
but after you had that follow-up conversation, what were
Yeah.
some emotions that came up for you?
Yeah, I I was so scared I would hurt her
Mm,
by calling her out on it. And I was so scared to be that vulnerable. And it was like I wanted to jump out of my skin is the best way I can describe it. You know what I mean? It
yeah.
felt like, I was on fire. Like I was so out of my body. Like I so needed to just thinking about her coming over and hugging me was just so like
Yeah.
visceral in a way. And I was so scared, right? That that both that I would be vulnerable, but even more than that, that I wouldn't live up to the true self that I had decided. I wouldn't live up to what
Mm,
Frankie wanted me to, that like I had agreed with Frankie, Frankie Post,
yeah.
Frankie's spirit that I would want to be. That we have this picture of her on our piano and where she's like literally like her hands in her chin and she's just looking like not smiling just like deep look and she has these big brown eyes and um and I remember looking at that picture of her as I was typing this note and like, okay, like you're demanding that I do. You're like, she's like, come
Mm,
on, mama, like
giving
get
you
it
the face.
together. You can do this. I did
Yeah.
a lot of hard things. Um, and Frankie also was one of these people that she, when friends were struggling, she'd be like, you have to tell somebody.
Mm,
And so she really believed that people should speak up. And I knew that. And so it felt like this sort of like I was so scared to do it and so afraid of hurting my friend and so realizing how necessary it was to do it
mm, at the same time.
all in the same motions. And you asked how I felt afterwards. I mean,
Yeah. Did they change?
yeah, it was like a flood of relief. I mean,
Mm,
I will say that like literally, like I think I wrote back to her in like, 30, like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like I was so happy. And in fact, like I ended up writing her two quick notes because there was that. And then I remembered we have this, so on our door of our apartment, we take little Polaroids before people would leave.
oh,
If anyone came to visit our home, before they would leave, they would take a picture with the kids. And there was, like, and then we would snap a little Polaroid and then we'd give one to the person and one would go on the door. It was sort of an easier way to say goodbye, maybe for
yeah.
us, maybe for the kids. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, she'd come over to dinner years before when the kids were much younger, like, 10, 12-ish age. And I was like, we still have your picture on the door with the kids. And so I like took a picture with my phone and and attached it to the email. I
Yeah.
missed her so much.
Yeah.
She was such a good friend.
It's just it's nice. It's nice to hear a story of speaking up and the good that can come from that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that that is a really powerful testimonial to the power of speaking up.
Yeah.
And yes, I look forward to all the
Yeah.
wonderful work that you were doing and seeing more of it in the world.
No, thank you so much. No, and thank you for doing this series. I think it's really important for people to understand sort of the value of speaking, how scary it is, but the value that can come from it. and having stories of that, I think, is really powerful. So,
It's cool. I know I'm out of time. It's
mhm,
cool thinking about I've seen the different people I've been interviewing whenever I
mhm,
ask the questions around feelings, when I
mm,
ask how they felt afterwards, you can almost see this
yeah,
physical like
yeah,
oh like this
yeah,
exhale. It's just been the same for each person. So that feeling of relief is worth it. It's worth doing the hard stuff.
yeah, yeah, exactly right. Exactly
All
right.
right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing all this and for Saturday interviews and all. I heard you have a very, very busy schedule trying to schedule you.
This is the good stuff. I don't mind making time for the good stuff.